I didn't ease into this war. I was shoved straight into it when HOA Karen pointed at my house and ordered me to take my Christmas lights down like she owned the ground my foundation rested on. December hadn't even stretched its legs yet when she decided that my home, my family, and my tradition were her winter project to crush. I remember dragging those storage boxes from the attic, lid edges biting into my palms, knowing exactly what each one contained, and knowing equally well that she would hate every single bulb inside them. Tree lights, roof LEDs, yard displays that flooded color across cold sidewalks. To me, those boxes were memory and routine. To her, they were rebellion waiting to be stamped out. I could already imagine her stiff blazer creaking when she crossed her arms, clipboard welded to her hand like a sheriff's badge that nobody had actually issued. She wanted control. I wanted light. That was enough to make us enemies in her mind. I didn't pretend to be innocent or naive about it either. I knew she had been waiting years for leverage, and the day she saw me carry those boxes outside, she thought she finally had it. Before I even untangled the first string of lights, I could feel her eyes on my back, like a rule book being thrown without words. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I started anyway. I hooked the ladder against the roof, flicked on the tester plugs, and let the first line of LEDs glow against the pale morning. That's when she struck. No greeting, no neighborly comment, just that clipped, condescending tone she specialized in, the verbal equivalent of a door being slammed directly into your face. What exactly do you think you're doing? She snapped, like my property line dissolved when she decided it did. I didn't look down at first. I let her words hang in the cold air because they said more about her than about me. When I finally glanced over, there she was. Late 50s, jaw tight, blazer pressed like she ironed it out of anger, clipboard under her arm as though it supplied oxygen. HOA Karen, the only antagonist this story was ever going to need. Putting up Christmas lights, I said, keeping my voice even because she feeds on agitation. Same thing I do every year. That answer wasn't enough for her because what she wanted wasn't information. She wanted submission. Her lips vanished into a thin line, the kind people get when they believe their authority should be unquestioned. The HOA has strict guidelines, she hissed, and this is excessive. Excessive? That was her word for joy when she didn't cause it or control it. She threatened a formal complaint while half the lights were still in my hands. She stepped closer to the ladder like proximity itself outranked me. I reminded her calmly that the HOA allowed decorations through January 5th. It was written, voted, and unchanged. She didn't care. Not like this, she snapped, gesturing at my half-assembled display, as though pointing made her decree real. Tacky, disruptive, hazardous. She stacked words the way insecure people stack titles. Then she gave me the line that clearly made her feel tall inside her own head. I will not allow it. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as an annoyance and started seeing the battle she was begging for. Because she wasn't talking about lights anymore. She was talking about control over my family, my choices, my right to make my home glow in the dead of winter. I told her plainly that she didn't run the neighborhood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I just cut the thread she wanted wrapped around my throat. Her face flushed crimson like my words had yanked the curtain off the version of herself she wanted everyone to believe in. We'll see about that, she spat, heels cracking sharply against the pavement as she marched away like she was practicing a victory exit in advance. That night, I finished everything out of principle as much as tradition. Every strand went up, every timing program synced, every roofline glowed. When I finally stepped back and plugged in the full display, the yard exploded into coordinated color. My kids clapped and shouted like the house itself was singing. The music slipped into the air, wrapping around laughter and steaming hot breath. And for one perfect test run, winter stopped feeling heavy. Neighbors paused as they walked, some cheering, some filming, most smiling, and I realized nobody needed permission to feel happy. Everyone except HOA Karen. She lurked across the street, arms barred across her chest, eyes narrow enough to cut through the lights she wanted so badly to darken. In that moment, she wasn't preserving order. She was fighting joy because it didn't bow. In the morning, the price of refusing to bow showed up taped to my front door. A cease and desist letter, pretending to be law, printed in stern fonts and slapped under the guise of community regulation. It threatened fines if I didn't shut the lights down. Her name carved itself across the bottom like a signature meant to intimidate anyone who read it. I stared at the glittering frost still clinging to the bushes, at the lights quietly glowing through the lingering cold, and then at the paper in my hand. She wanted to make me choose between peace and spine. I chose the latter without hesitation. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one from someone who wasn't scared of clipboards or titles. I didn't know then that the fight would drag in news vans, neighbors, a boardroom, and eventually the governor himself. At that point, all I knew was simple. My lights were staying on. The days that followed proved just how far HOA Karen was prepared to go to win a battle she'd already lost in the eyes of everyone but herself. Word spread faster than carols. Families wandered to my street like moths drawn to warmth they could finally see. Kids sat on lawns with cocoa. People parked. Laughter carried through cold air. The lights pulsed in perfect rhythm with music I'd programmed for weeks. And on the fringe of all of it, like a storm cloud that refused to move, stood HOA Karen with that same suffocating glare, pretending she was witnessing crime instead of color. The more people smiled, the more she tightened. Then came the certified letter, formal seal, official language, theatrical seriousness that tried to convert irritation into authority. It ordered me to remove or reduce decorations within 72 hours due to excessive display complaints. At the bottom, her name again, upgraded by a title I hadn't seen before. Vice President. She had wriggled onto the board in the shadows where apathy lives. And now she believed the promotion made her unstoppable. My wife held the letter with worry, told me we could scale things back, said the stress wasn't worth it. I heard her fear, I understood it. But then my youngest tugged my sleeve and whispered for me not to take the lights down. That whisper weighed more than her threat ever could. I wrote back without theatrics or anger, and said the decorations followed the rules. I would not remove them. 2 mornings later, hammering woke me. The sound was blunt, intrusive, deliberate. I walked outside to find HOA Karen driving a wooden stake into my lawn like she was claiming land. A bright red sign hung from it, announcing my property as in violation. She had turned my yard into a public accusation without consent. My blood boiled, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer audacity of her planting herself on land she didn't own. I told her she couldn't do that. She sniffed with that manufactured superiority and said the neighborhood deserved to know I was breaking rules. She didn't understand that this was the last straw, not the first blow. I took pictures. I recorded her. I collected the letters. Every threat turned into documented proof with one button on my phone. And then I called the news. I didn't scream. I didn't rant. I simply gave them a story about an HOA trying to cancel Christmas lights in a neighborhood full of families who came to watch them. They arrived by the weekend. Cameras rolled. A reporter asked why I refused to take the decorations down. And I told the truth without drama. Christmas was about joy, not control. And one person's obsession shouldn't suffocate everyone else's happiness. The story aired. It spread. It grew wings online. Comments flooded in. People chose sides. And most didn't choose her. Suddenly her empire of bylaws faced something it couldn't intimidate. Attention she didn't control. What none of us expected was the call from the governor's office. They had seen the story. They had heard about the display. They wanted to attend the lighting ceremony. I nearly dropped the phone. For the first time, the scope shifted entirely out of her reach. She was still preparing letters and notices, while something vastly larger walked toward the situation she believed she owned. The night of the ceremony arrived, and with it came crowds, cars, children wrapped in scarves, neighbors who had grown tired of watching fear masquerade as authority. I stood in front of my house, calm but grounded in certainty. The governor stepped out of his vehicle with the ease of someone who didn't need to posture to be heard. The crowd responded like oxygen had just entered the space. HOA. Karen tried one last time to dominate the moment. She raised her voice. She listed made-up violations. She threatened consequences she hadn't actually obtained permission to issue. And then the governor asked her the one question she couldn't answer. Where was the authorized vote and documentation behind her orders? silence carved across her face. The clipboard suddenly looked like plastic, not power. He announced, simply and directly, that the only rule that mattered that night was that the lights stayed on. The crowd erupted. Children cheered. Music began. He pressed the remote my son had handed him, and the house ignited in color that swept across roofs and trees and fences in waves. HOA Karen stood frozen, helpless, watching the exact opposite of her command become reality in front of an entire community. Her collapse wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, and that made it permanent. The HOA withdrew the complaint days later. The board implemented procedures to keep anyone from acting alone the way she had. Neighbors added more decorations the next year, not fewer. My house became a gathering place, not a battleground, and she walked past it afterward without a word. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She didn't threaten. She simply went silent because there was nothing left to swing. The governor turned on my lights. But the real victory was simpler. They stayed on. They will keep staying on. And when December comes again, and those same colors spill over the street she thought she controlled, she will see them without a clipboard to hide behind, and without a voice that anyone is required to listen to. That is the end of the story. Not fireworks, not speeches, just lights shining where she said they couldn't, and her having nothing left to say about it. I kept standing there after the ceremony ended, not because I needed to savor anything, but because the weight that had been pressing on my chest for days was simply gone, like a storm cloud that had spent itself and realized it had nowhere else to rain. People filtered away slowly, still talking, still laughing, still pointing at the house glowing behind me like it was its own small universe. The governor left with the same calm he arrived with, nodding once toward me as if to say the obvious didn't need repeating. The obvious was this: the lights were on, and nothing she could do or say had changed that. I saw HOA Karen in the distance, rigid at the edge of the crowd, clutching that clipboard without purpose, staring as if she were trying to rewind a moment that had already been broadcast, recorded, and remembered. She didn't approach me, not because she suddenly liked me or agreed with anything, but because she no longer had a path to walk that led to anyone listening. Her authority had snapped in public without needing to be dramatized, and she felt it more than anyone else there. I went back inside later that night, closed the door, and let the sound of synchronized music seep through the windows like proof that silence from her side of the street finally meant something useful. My kids fell asleep on the couch, faces washed in shifting colors from the living room window, completely unaware of bylaws or board positions or the fragile ego of a neighbor who couldn't stand joy she didn't authorize. They just knew the lights were still there. That was the only scoreboard that mattered in our house. I stayed up longer, not celebrating, just letting my mind catch up with reality. It was strange how quickly fear evaporated once you realized it had always depended on you agreeing to it. That's what HOA Karen never understood. Her power wasn't built on rules. It was built on people being too tired to argue, too busy to resist, too polite to say no. The moment someone refused to play along, the whole structure she hid behind looked flimsy and ridiculous, like cardboard painted to look like stone. Even she seemed to realize it now. The next morning, the street looked different without anything actually changing. Cars still drove past slowly to see the lights. Neighbors still waved, but there was a looseness in the air, a kind of collective exhale that said everyone had been holding tension because of one person's obsession and only just recognized it. I saw her step out onto her porch, pause, and then pretend to check her mailbox just to give herself something to do. She didn't look at my house directly, but she didn't need to. The reflection of the lights stained every surface in sight. You can ignore something without escaping it, and she had finally found herself on the receiving end of that truth. Days blurred together after that. Not dramatic, not explosive, just peaceful, in a way that felt unfamiliar because we had gotten used to her stirring things up over nothing. The HOA board sent out a carefully worded notice that sounded neutral, but carried the weight of an apology they didn't dare write plainly. It explained new procedures, clarified approval processes, and acknowledged past miscommunications. It never used her name. It didn't need to. Everyone could read between every line and see exactly who those paragraphs were built around. She attended the next meeting like always, sat straighter than anyone else, spoke less than she ever had. When she did talk, people didn't flinch. They didn't scramble. They simply listened, weighed, and moved on. That was her real punishment. Existing in the same room she once dominated and realizing it no longer bent around her voice. I put the notice in a drawer and didn't think about it again, because I didn't need to. The structure that once backed her had been forced to stand on level ground, and on level ground she was just another person with opinions that could be ignored. One evening, close to Christmas Eve, I walked outside alone and stood at the edge of my yard, watching the lights run through their program. Music drifted out softly. A light snow had begun, tiny flakes melting the second they touched warm bulbs. The street was quiet, except for a few cars rolling by at a crawl, so the kids inside could stare longer. I noticed movement across the street and saw her again. No clipboard this time, no stiff blazer, just a person standing in the cold, caught between stubborn pride and the undeniable reality blinking rhythmically in front of her. For a second, I thought she might say something, not an apology. She isn't built for those. Just something. But nothing came. She simply turned, went back inside, and closed her door like someone sealing a room they couldn't manage anymore. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt finished. That's the difference between winning and needing to be seen winning. She still needed an audience. I didn't. I only needed the lights to stay on, my family to laugh, my home to feel like my own house again instead of a battlefield for someone else's ego. The governor had done more than press a button that night. He drew a line she couldn't cross back over. Every December from now on will remind her of it. Not because anyone will bring it up, but because silence itself will surround her, where fear used to live. The following year I didn't even think twice about bringing the boxes back down from the attic. There was no pause, no breath held waiting for footsteps, no expectation of a notice taped to the door. I unpacked everything slowly, methodically, not as a challenge but as routine. Neighbors wandered over and offered to help string lights along the fence, laughing about how crooked their own attempts had been in past years. We added more, not because I needed to prove anything, but because no one felt like asking permission anymore. Kids treated the whole block like a festival walkway, moving from house to house, pointing at displays that had sprouted where caution used to live. She tried once, lightly, to complain about parking congestion. It died halfway out of her mouth when she realized nobody froze anymore at the sound of her voice. Power had left long before words did, and she was one of the last people to notice. I don't pretend that she changed. People like her rarely rewrite themselves just because their methods stop working. She still straightens her spine when she says the letters HOA. She still clings to procedure like a life raft. She still believes order means control, and control means compliance. The difference now is that belief doesn't travel beyond the edges of her own skin. It stays contained where it belongs, instead of spilling into everyone else's lives. That's victory. Not cheering, not mocking, not public defeat dragged longer than necessary. Just containment. Just finally living without the shadow of someone else's insecurity, trying to dictate what color your house is allowed to glow in winter. When people talk about that year now, they don't talk about fear or threats or paperwork. They talk about how the governor showed up to our street and turned on my Christmas lights like it was the most normal thing in the world. Kids who were barely old enough to remember still point out the exact spot he stood, as if the ground itself held on to the moment. And somewhere a few houses away, HOA Karen hears it all through thin walls she can't regulate, sits quietly, and has nothing left to write about it. That's how it ends. Not in noise, not in speeches, in silence, with the lights still on, and her finally, completely out of the way. The HOA in our neighborhood wasn't some towering institution with marble floors and echoing halls. It was a small room, plastic chairs, stale coffee, and a handful of people who were mostly tired of emails. But inside that smallness, HOA Karen had built herself a throne out of procedure, and she guarded it like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She was the person who actually read every bylaw twice, and then pretended the margins belonged to her too. She joined committees no one else wanted, volunteered for roles no one else had time for, and then acted like she had been crowned rather than tolerated. She wasn't elected by admiration. She rose through vacancy, through everyone else shrugging and saying, "Sure, if you want to do it." She took over newsletters, and suddenly every paragraph sounded like a warning. She offered to monitor compliance, and suddenly neighbors had photos of their trash cans in their inbox. She rewrote violation forms so they looked harsher, thicker, more official, as if bold fonts could invent new authority where none existed. She quoted bylaws from memory with the confidence of someone absolutely certain no one else would bother checking whether she was right. And most of the time, no one did. That's how she learned that saying something firmly often worked better than being correct. So, when my Christmas lights became her chosen battlefield, she believed the system she had wrapped around herself like armor would make everyone else kneel. She hid her personal hatred of anything joyful behind words like community standards and uniform aesthetics, pretending that her irritation was civic duty instead of ego. She sent certified letters, not because they were necessary, but because the heavy envelopes felt like power landing in someone else's hands. She staged her authority publicly on purpose, always across the street, always with that clipboard, always making sure someone saw her as the guardian of order. But the truth underneath all of it was smaller than the image she projected. The HOA wasn't a weapon. She just swung it like one. The board didn't command anything. She simply spoke loudly enough that people assumed it did. And when she finally pushed too far, when she pounded that red notice into my lawn and called it regulation, she didn't realize she had exposed the structure she relied on as hollow. Because once people finally looked closely, once they read the same lines she'd been hiding behind, they saw what I saw. She wasn't protecting rules. She was using them as camouflage for control, and control only works as long as people agree to be controlled. The turning point wasn't loud. It was the moment I stopped arguing with HOA Karen and started treating every move she made like evidence she was helpfully generating for me. When she hammered that red violation sign into my lawn, as if she were planting a flag on conquered territory, something clicked. I took a breath, stepped back, and realized she had just crossed from annoying into reckless, from petty into documented. So I photographed everything, not as a threat, but as a record she couldn't erase. I captured the stake driven into soil she didn't own, the wording on the sign that pretended to be law, the letters stamped with authority she didn't actually have, and the moments she marched onto my property like my driveway was a hallway she supervised. Then I sat down with the bylaws she worshipped so much and read them without her commentary, slowly, line by line, until the fear she wanted people to feel dissolved. The rules didn't say what she said they did. Decorations were allowed. Fines required board votes that had never taken place. Public shaming signage wasn't authorized anywhere. Safety hazards needed inspections she had never requested. Page after page turned her confidence into contradiction. The camera crews that showed up caught more than my house. They caught her pacing in the background, furious and exposed, the visual proof of a person who confused control with purpose. Neighbors started reaching out quietly, sharing stories that matched mine almost exactly, warning letters over harmless wreaths, threats over imaginary violations, years of being worn down until compliance felt easier than resistance. Even some board members began forwarding emails and minutes that showed how often she acted alone while claiming the board's full support. The pile of proof didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity. She kept talking, and every sentence she delivered in that clipped, authoritative tone turned into another line in a file she didn't know existed. By the time the governor's office called, not with drama but with calm curiosity, it was obvious that what she had framed as rule enforcement was actually a single person overreaching again and again because no one had stopped her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't corner her. I simply gathered what was already there and let the truth become heavier than her threats. The confrontation didn't happen in a quiet office or over a letter slipped into a mailbox. It unfolded in the open, under the glow of the very lights she demanded be shut off, with the entire neighborhood standing there as witnesses, whether they meant to be or not. Cars lined both sides of the street, engines ticking as they cooled, kids bundled in scarves and hats bouncing on their toes, while parents pretended they were just there to see decorations, even though everyone knew they were also there to see what would happen when HOA Karen finally realized the grip she thought she had was already gone. She arrived exactly as I expected. Chin lifted like defiance was oxygen, clipboard tucked beneath her arm, voice sharpened into something she believed would cut through everything. She announced that the display was in violation, that it must come down immediately, that I was endangering the community with lights and music and happiness that wasn't run through her permission first. But something was different this time. People didn't shrink when she spoke. They didn't look at the ground or at me, waiting for compliance. They just looked at her like they were finally seeing the size of the person behind the volume. I didn't argue with her. I just asked for the votes, the records, the documents she claimed existed. She opened her mouth and closed it again because for the first time the audience wasn't intimidated. They were informed. Cameras turned toward her, red lights blinking, microphones waiting, and all she had were phrases she'd repeated for years that suddenly sounded empty in the open air. Then the governor arrived without sirens or spectacle, just presence, and the balance in the street shifted so sharply she felt it before anyone said a word. He greeted neighbors, shook my hand, listened when she tried to reassert herself in that familiar, clipped tone, and then calmly asked her to identify exactly which rule, which authorized vote, which recorded decision gave her the power to demand what she was demanding. She had nothing. It wasn't a dramatic pause. It was a hollow one. He turned to the crowd and said the lights would stay on, not with bravado but with finality, and when he pressed the remote my son had handed him, and the house erupted into synchronized color and music, the moment folded in on itself. Kids cheered, adults laughed, people clapped, not because it was flashy, but because the fear that had hung over the block for years slipped right off their shoulders. She stood there in the middle of it all, unable to shout over a sound that wasn't noise but relief, and for the first time since she had crowned herself the enforcer of everything, she was simply a person with a clipboard no one needed to look at. That was her public collapse. Not being screamed at, not being humiliated loudly, but standing completely still, while the world she tried to control moved on without waiting for her permission. When the crowd thinned and the music settled back into rhythm instead of applause, I realized the moment wasn't about winning an argument. It was about making sure she could never rebuild the platform she had been shouting from for years. People like HOA Karen don't disappear because they are wrong. They regroup, rename the same behavior, and wait for everyone to get tired again. So I didn't chase her, and I didn't gloat. I went home, sat down at my table, and turned everything she had done into something she couldn't outrun, a record. Every notice, every fabricated deadline, every image of that red sign stabbed into my lawn, every video clip of her trespassing and lecturing, every screenshot of the news footage where she paced in the background, every message and bylaw she misquoted. I arranged them in order until the story told itself, without me needing to add a single word of commentary. Then I sent it to the full board, not to her, because the problem was no longer personal, it was structural. They saw what she had been for years while they weren't paying attention. A single person using everyone else's apathy as a ladder. I didn't threaten lawsuits. I didn't demand punishment. I asked for process, for recorded votes, for limits on unilateral enforcement, for written policies that couldn't be bent into whatever shape she needed that day. And they did what fear had stopped them from doing before. They agreed. Meetings changed. Procedures tightened. Authority that she used to wave around like a weapon now required checks, minutes, signatures, and other people. She spoke during those sessions, and the room didn't recoil anymore. They simply listened, and then decided without her shadow falling across the table. I also drew my own line in writing, calmly, permanently, informing her she wasn't to step onto my property or post anything upon it again without board authorization. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary with teeth made of policy instead of anger. She kept the blazer, kept the clipboard, kept the posture, but what she didn't keep was influence. And losing that, for someone who built their personality around control, was the only retaliation that actually mattered. Victory didn't feel like fireworks exploding or trumpets blaring. It felt like waking up one morning and realizing there was nothing to brace for anymore. No notices taped to my door at sunrise. No footsteps marching across my lawn under the excuse of enforcement. No red signs. No threats wrapped in legal wording. No sense that joy needed to justify itself. The lights stayed exactly where they were supposed to be. On my house, in my yard, woven through the trees, pulsing gently in winter air like a heartbeat that no longer had anything chasing it. Another December rolled in, and for the first time in years I brought the boxes down from the attic without so much as a thought about who might be watching. It wasn't defiance. It was normalcy, finally returned to the place it always should have been. Neighbors walked over and helped without hesitation, laughing when strands tangled, telling me which songs their kids hoped I'd sync the lights to this time. Our street turned into a ribbon of color and sound, not because anyone wanted to challenge her again, but because nobody cared about her permission anymore. That quiet indifference was the final nail in the coffin of her imagined authority. She still lived there. She still walked her dog, still straightened up when she saw something she didn't like, still held herself like someone who believed rules bent toward her when she spoke. But the difference now was simple and devastating for her. Nobody stopped what they were doing. Cars parked where they always had. Decorations went up anyway. Conversations continued as if her voice were background noise rather than command. She attended HOA meetings with the same stiff posture and spoke into a room that no longer tilted to accommodate her. Motions moved forward without her name attached. Decisions got made without her tone looming over them. She didn't lose a title as much as she lost gravity. People stopped orbiting her, and she had no idea what to do without pull. The governor's visit became neighborhood shorthand. For the moment, everything changed. Kids pointed at the spot where he stood like it was a landmark. Older neighbors smiled when they talked about the night the lights came on, and stayed on. It wasn't about celebrity or spectacle. It was about the message carved into the memory of that evening. She ordered darkness, and the highest authority in the state turned the lights on anyway. That truth hung in the air every December afterward, wordless but heavy, settling on rooftops along with the snow. I didn't seek her out. I didn't need apologies or confrontation or closure wrapped in conversation. My closure was the fact that none of her actions mattered anymore. My house glowed. My kids laughed. My neighbors gathered without fear. She existed on the same street as someone who had tried to shut all of that down and failed so completely that the failure became part of the holiday story people told each other casually. Like weather. One night near the end of the season, I stood alone at the end of my driveway watching the colors roll across the front of the house in time with the music, breath fogging in the cold, the world reduced to light, snow, and distant laughter. Across the way, her curtain shifted slightly, just enough to show she was still watching, even if she would never again step across the street to make a demand. The fabric fell back into place. No door slammed, no voice called out. Nothing happened, and that was the point. It ended not with a final argument or a lesson spelled out in words, but with her silence and my light still burning against the winter night, exactly where she said they couldn't be.